Guardians? Welcome back to Olympus Alliance. 5 days ago, Crow arrived in Hero Wars Alliance, and since that moment we've been doing exactly what we've always done whenever a new hero enters the battlefield. Rather than rushing to conclusions or following the excitement surrounding a new release, we decided to spend the last few days putting Crow through as many tests as possible, trying different team compositions, experimenting with different relic levels, facing both physical and magic teams, and, most importantly, understanding how he actually performs once the theory meets real battles. Over the past 5 days we've released several videos covering every part of this hero individually. We explored his skills, explained how to build him, analyzed every one of his relics, tested multiple team compositions, and even looked at the best ways to counter him. But after reading hundreds of comments, one request appeared again and again: can you put everything together into one complete guide? So today, that's exactly what we're going to do. This isn't another first impression, and it certainly isn't a launch day review based purely on what looked good on paper. Everything you're about to hear comes from days of testing, countless battles, and a lot of time spent understanding not only what Crow does well, but also where he struggles, which heroes allow him to reach his full potential, and where he truly fits within the current meta. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how to build Crow, which relics deserve your investment, the team compositions that brought us the best results during testing, the heroes capable of shutting him down, and, most importantly, whether Crow is actually worth investing your resources into. So if you're looking for one video that brings together everything we've learned over the last 5 days, you've come to the right place. Guardians? This is the ultimate Crow guide. Before we start talking about his build, his relics or the teams where he performs best, we first need to understand what Crow is actually designed to do, because that's the biggest mistake many players are making. They see a new honor hero, notice that he applies silence, and immediately label him as just another anti-mage specialist. After testing him extensively, I can confidently say that's only part of the story. Yes, Crow was clearly designed to punish intelligence-based heroes, and against traditional mage compositions he performs exceptionally well. His ability to constantly apply silence completely disrupts the rhythm those teams rely on, preventing key heroes from casting their abilities and breaking the chains of skills that usually allow them to dominate a fight. But what surprised us the most during testing was that Crow doesn't win battles simply because he silences mages. He wins because he controls the tempo of the entire fight. Every part of his kit was built around maintaining that pressure for as long as possible. One ability applies silence, another spreads it across the battlefield, another rewards him for attacking enemies that are already silenced, and his final passive extends those effects even further. Instead of 4 independent skills, Crow has one of the most connected kits we've seen in a long time, where every ability naturally feeds into the next and creates a continuous cycle of control. That also explains why he feels so different from heroes like Cornelius. Cornelius is a specialist who looks for a single target and tries to eliminate it as quickly as possible. Crow approaches the fight from a completely different angle. Rather than removing one dangerous mage, he gradually disrupts the entire enemy team, making it harder and harder for them to execute their own strategy as the battle progresses. And that's exactly why, after 5 days of testing, our opinion hasn't really changed. Crow isn't a hero you pick simply because he's new. He's a hero you pick because he fundamentally changes the way certain matchups are played, especially against teams that depend heavily on abilities, control chains and magical pressure. Once you understand that philosophy, everything else about his build starts to make perfect sense. One of the things we appreciated the most during our testing was just how well Crow's entire kit fits together. It's been a long time since we've seen a hero whose abilities feel so interconnected, because nothing in his design exists in isolation. Every skill has a clear purpose, and every mechanic naturally leads into the next. Everything begins with silence. Crow's abilities are constantly looking for opportunities to apply it across the battlefield, and while that already makes life extremely difficult for intelligence-based heroes, that's really only the beginning of what makes him so effective. Once enemies are silenced, Crow immediately starts taking advantage of it. His abilities become more efficient, his pressure increases, and his damage ramps up as the fight progresses. Instead of relying on one powerful ability to decide the battle, he slowly builds momentum, making every rotation stronger than the last and giving the opposing team less and less room to recover. What makes this so dangerous is that Crow doesn't simply interrupt individual heroes. He interrupts the entire rhythm of a composition. Most Magic teams rely on chaining abilities together, with one ultimate leading into another until the fight snowballs completely out of control. Crow breaks that chain. He forces those teams to play at his pace instead of theirs, and that alone can completely change the outcome of a battle. Another aspect that really stood out during testing is how rewarding good timing feels when playing Crow. Unlike many heroes that simply press a button whenever their energy bar is full, Crow constantly rewards players who understand how his mechanics interact with one another. The more consistently you keep enemies under silence, the more value you extract from every part of his kit, creating a cycle that becomes increasingly difficult for your opponent to break. And that's probably the biggest lesson we learned after spending several days testing him. Crow isn't a burst hero. He's a momentum hero. He doesn't overwhelm his opponents in the opening seconds of a fight. Instead, he gradually takes control of the battlefield, limits the enemy's options, and slowly shifts the battle in your favor until the opposing team simply can't execute its own strategy anymore. That's what makes him feel so unique, and it's also the reason why his build is so straightforward. Every investment you make should support that single objective, keeping Crow alive, keeping his silence active, and allowing his control cycle to continue for as long as possible. Now that we understand how Crow wins his battles, the next question becomes much easier to answer. How should you actually build him? The good news is that Crow is one of the most straightforward heroes we've built in quite some time. Unlike other heroes that have several viable paths depending on the composition you're running, Crow has a very clear identity, and because of that, his upgrade priorities are surprisingly simple. Starting with the Spark of Power, our recommendation is exactly what you'd expect. Max it as soon as possible. Every additional point of agility, physical attack and survivability directly improves the way Crow performs, allowing him to stay on the battlefield longer while increasing the effectiveness of every part of his kit. When it comes to skins, agility should always be your first priority. It's by far the most valuable stat for Crow because it improves several areas of his kit at the same time, increasing his physical attack while also giving him additional armor. Once you've finished his agility skin, the health skin becomes the next logical investment, adding the durability he needs to keep cycling silence throughout longer battles. His artifacts follow exactly the same philosophy. The Ring of Agility should always come first, since it strengthens every aspect of his kit. After that, focus on his book for the additional health and armor penetration, giving Crow both the survivability and offensive pressure he needs to remain effective against enemy backlines. His weapon comes last. The team-wide physical attack bonus is certainly useful, but Crow benefits much more from strengthening his own mechanics before investing in buffs for the rest of the team. The same approach applies to his glyphs. Prioritize agility first, followed by physical attack and health, then armor penetration, leaving magic defense as your final investment. If your resources are limited, bringing all 5 glyphs to around level 40 before maxing individual ones provides excellent overall value and gives Crow a very balanced foundation. Finally, let's talk about his talisman. The combination of agility as the primary attribute with armor as the secondary bonuses fits Crow perfectly. Agility increases everything he already wants to do offensively, while the additional armor allows him to survive longer against physical attackers, giving him more opportunities to keep applying silence and controlling the pace of the fight. As you've probably noticed, every part of Crow's build follows the same philosophy. You're not trying to turn him into a burst damage dealer. You're investing in the attributes that allow him to stay alive, maintain his control cycle, and continuously disrupt the enemy team from the beginning of the fight until the very end. Now, if there's one area where our opinion became even stronger after several days of testing, it's Crow's Relics. When we first looked at them, we said they had the potential to become one of the best relic sets introduced in Hero Wars Alliance. After seeing them in real battles, I can honestly say they lived up to those expectations. And the reason isn't because they simply make Crow hit harder. It's because every single relic improves the exact mechanic that already makes him so effective. Rather than introducing completely new abilities, each upgrade expands on the same core idea, making his control more reliable, more consistent, and far more difficult for the enemy to deal with. It all starts with his first relic, which makes Crow much more consistent at spreading silence across the battlefield. Instead of depending entirely on his active abilities, he begins applying pressure automatically, making it much easier to keep multiple enemies under constant control throughout the fight. The level 10 relic is where things start becoming really interesting. One of Crow's biggest limitations before investing in relics is that much of his control is focused on intelligence heroes. Once you unlock this upgrade, that limitation disappears, allowing silence to affect the entire enemy team instead of only a specific group of heroes. Suddenly, every ability in Crow's kit gains more value because far more enemies are interacting with his mechanics. Then comes the level 20 relic, and this is where his entire kit starts working like a perfectly connected engine. Instead of simply spreading silence, Crow now begins turning that control into significantly more battlefield pressure. The more enemies carrying silence, the more value every ability generates, creating a chain reaction where one mechanic naturally feeds the next. At this point, it becomes very difficult for opponents to recover their rhythm once Crow has established control. And finally, we arrive at the level 30 relic, which, in our opinion, is the upgrade that completely changes how this hero is played. Rather than increasing damage or adding another layer of crowd control, it fundamentally changes the way many enemy heroes function. As long as Crow can maintain silence somewhere on the battlefield, heroes that rely heavily on debuffs and curses immediately lose a huge part of what makes them so dangerous. That single mechanic creates entirely new matchups and forces players to think differently about how they build their teams against Crow. What impressed us the most wasn't the individual power of each relic. It was how naturally they connect with one another. Every upgrade prepares the next one. Every relic strengthens the same identity. And instead of feeling like 4 separate bonuses, they feel like one continuous progression that transforms Crow from a very strong control hero into one of the most complete anti-control specialists currently available in the game. If you're planning to invest relic shards into Crow, our advice is simple. His relics aren't just good because they increase numbers. They're good because they make the hero function exactly the way he was designed to function, only with far greater consistency, and that's what gives them such incredible long-term value. Of course, having a well-built Crow is only half the equation. The other half is surrounding him with the right heroes. And this is probably where Crow surprised us the most during testing. When he was first announced, many players immediately assumed he would only fit into physical teams. On paper, that seemed like the obvious conclusion. After all, he's an agility hero who deals physical damage, so pairing him with physical carries appeared to be the natural choice. But after days of experimenting with different compositions, we quickly realized that Crow is far more flexible than many people initially believed. His greatest strength isn't increasing physical damage. It's controlling the battlefield. And that means he can successfully fit into several different archetypes, provided the rest of the team can take advantage of the time and space his control creates. If your goal is to play aggressively, pairing Crow with heroes like Durain and Yasmin produces incredible results. While Crow constantly disrupts the enemy's ability rotation, those heroes are free to build momentum, and eliminate priority targets before the opposing team has a chance to stabilize. Add a durable frontline and a reliable support, and you have a composition that applies relentless pressure from the opening seconds of the fight. On the other hand, if you prefer longer, control-oriented battles, Crow performs just as well alongside heroes like Folio, Lian, and Niu. Instead of relying on explosive damage, these teams slowly suffocate the opponent, layering one control effect after another until the enemy simply runs out of opportunities to execute their own strategy. During our testing, these compositions were some of the most satisfying to play because every hero contributed to the same objective, denying the opponent any chance to recover. One interaction that impressed us more than expected was Crow's synergy with Thea. At first glance, it doesn't look like an obvious partnership, but once we started testing it became clear why it works so well. Because Thea is also capable of applying silence, she helps maintain the conditions Crow wants throughout the battle, making his mechanics significantly more consistent, and allowing his relics to deliver maximum value far more often. And that's probably the biggest lesson we learned after testing dozens of different compositions. Don't build your team around Crow's damage. Build it around his control. The heroes that perform best alongside Crow are usually the ones capable of taking advantage of the opportunities his silence creates. Whether they're physical carries looking for uninterrupted damage, or control specialists extending the enemy's suffering, the result is always the same. Crow slows the opponent down, and the rest of your team capitalizes on that advantage. That's why we believe Crow has so much long-term potential. He's not locked into one single composition. He's a control piece that can adapt to multiple playstyles, and as new heroes are released, we fully expect even more powerful combinations to emerge around him. Now, as impressive as Crow has been throughout our testing, there's one thing we've said since the very beginning of this series. No hero in Hero Wars Alliance is unbeatable. Every hero has strengths. Every hero has weaknesses. And Crow is no exception. The biggest mistake we've seen over the last few days is players trying to counter Crow by removing his silence. Unfortunately, that's simply not how the mechanic works. Silence is a control effect rather than a traditional debuff, which means heroes capable of cleansing negative effects won't suddenly make Crow's biggest strength disappear. Once we understood that distinction, the way we approached the matchup changed completely. Instead of trying to remove Crow's control, we started asking a different question. How do we stop Crow from controlling the fight in the first place? The answer is surprisingly simple. You either reduce the amount of time he spends controlling the battlefield, or you build teams that aren't heavily dependent on casting abilities to function. That's exactly why physical damage compositions performed much better than many players expected during our testing. While silence certainly slows them down, physical carries continue applying pressure through their basic attacks, allowing them to remain dangerous even when their abilities are temporarily unavailable. Control heroes also proved to be extremely effective against Crow, especially those capable of interrupting his own rotations. Somna was one of the standout performers, repeatedly disrupting Crow's momentum with sleep and forcing him to lose valuable time that he normally uses to maintain constant silence. Lian delivered similarly impressive results by continuously breaking Crow's rhythm through charm, preventing him from keeping the pressure exactly where he wanted it. Electra deserves a special mention as well. Once her relic reaches level 30, she gains immunity to control effects after dropping below half health, allowing her to continue functioning normally while much of the battlefield struggles under silence. That single interaction can completely change the flow of a fight, particularly in longer battles where sustained pressure becomes more important than explosive damage. And finally, there's one more lesson we learned after testing Crow extensively. Don't try to beat him by fighting his strongest mechanic directly. Beat him by forcing him into battles where that mechanic has less impact. The less your team depends on uninterrupted ability rotations, the less value Crow generates over the course of the fight. That's why understanding your own composition is often just as important as understanding Crow himself. At the end of the day, Crow is an exceptional control hero, but like every control hero in Hero Wars, he becomes significantly less threatening once you stop allowing him to dictate the pace of the battle. And that's exactly how we recommend approaching the matchup. So, after 5 days of testing, after hundreds of battles, and after exploring every aspect of this hero, there's really only one question left to answer. Is Crow actually worth building? Our answer is yes. But probably not for the reason many players expected. Crow isn't worth investing in because he's the newest hero, and he certainly isn't worth building simply because he's performing well during his release week. Heroes come and go, balance changes happen, and today's strongest pick isn't always tomorrow's. What makes Crow stand out is something much more important. He fills a role that very few heroes in Hero Wars currently occupy. He gives players a reliable answer to compositions that rely heavily on magical pressure, long ability chains and continuous control. Rather than trying to overpower those teams with raw damage, Crow dismantles the way they function, forcing them to play a completely different game. And that's exactly what impressed us the most throughout our testing. At no point did Crow feel like a hero that wins because his numbers are too high. He wins because his mechanics are intelligent. Every part of his kit supports the next. Every upgrade strengthens the same identity. Every relic builds naturally on the previous one. And every successful fight feels like the result of good strategy rather than overwhelming power. Of course, he's not perfect. Physical heavy compositions can still create problems for him, experienced players can build around his strengths, and like every control hero in the game, he depends on surviving long enough to keep his mechanics active. If Crow falls too early, much of the pressure he creates disappears with him. But that's exactly what good hero design should look like. Strong, influential, capable of changing difficult matchups, without ever feeling impossible to beat. So, if you've been looking for a hero that brings something genuinely different to your roster, Crow has absolutely earned our recommendation. Not because he's replacing every other control hero in the game, but because he offers a completely new way of approaching some of the most difficult battles in today's meta. Now we'd love to hear your thoughts. After spending the last few days playing Crow, has he lived up to your expectations? Have you discovered new teams, unexpected synergies or clever counters that surprised you during your own testing? Let us know down in the comments, because many of the best discussions on this channel start with your ideas, and they often help us discover interactions we haven't explored yet. If you enjoyed this ultimate guide and found it helpful, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to Olympus Alliance, and turn on notifications, so you never miss our next guide, breakdown or strategy discussion. As always, Guardians, thank you for your incredible support. Stay tuned, stay sharp, and, as always, salute and friendship.